Well, good morning and welcome to the August Cybersecurity Meetup. I am here today with my friend and companion Anil Malwani,
Good morning,
our
everyone.
senior cybersecurity consultant, also our service manager. And I am Luis Alvarez, President and CEO of Alvarez Technology Group. We're happy that you're here today. For those of you that have not attended the meetup, it's 30 minutes of impactful, we think, information that hopefully will give you some insight into some of the current things that are going on in the cybersecurity realm. Today, we will be talking about the Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, as it's known by. And some updates around that because things are finally starting to accelerate after a few years of very slow crawl of CMMC implementation. There is a Q&A button available to you at the top of your screen. Feel free to use that to ask any questions throughout the presentation. We'll try to get to all the questions while we're in the meeting, but we do respect the time of the folks that are here. So if we get to the end of the 30 minutes and we haven't gotten into everybody, we'll be sure to get back to you and answer your question offline. In addition, we are giving away a $25 gift card for what exactly, Anil? Are we doing
it? For Amazon.
Amazon gift card. We will be pulling the winner after the webinar and informing them. We'll be notifying them via email. Want to make sure that everybody that does show up gets a chance to participate. So we'll wait till after the end of the webinar. So with that, we're going to get started. And I'm going to pull up part of a presentation that I gave to the Monterey Bay PTAC. This is an organization that helps government contractors get contracts. And I'm going to go ahead and take myself and Anil off the screen so we don't distract you as we talk about this. So I want to go down memory lane a little bit for those of you that are not as familiar with the CMMC program and what it means. And then we will take some time to give you some updates as to what's currently going on and how that impacts contractors or potential government contractors. So the CMMC program was developed by the Department of Defense specifically to protect government-related information, in particular, two things that they call controlled unclassified information and federal contract information. Confidential or classified information has always been protected, and there's been, rigorous protections in place for the most part for that kind of information, that kind of data. However, there's also a realization by the Department of Defense that sometimes what's considered to be unclassified information still could be used by the bad guys to gain insight into what's going on with our defense program. So, for example, let's say you're an architect and you're helping design a new facility for the Air Force, and that facility includes several rooms that are designed for classified information to be stored. The blueprints themselves wouldn't be classified, but they would be considered controlled and classified information because we don't want those blueprints to fall into the hands of a foreign government that might be able to use that information to figure out a way to get to that storage facility. So that's one example of controlled and classified information, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It also requires an independent certification of cybersecurity processes and protections. And the final rulemaking was finally submitted last month to the Office of Management and Budget. And that was a big step because that means that at this point, it's in for consideration. And this is where the government sausage is made. Nobody wants to see it happening. So OMB keeps it under wraps. And at the end of that, they come out with an interim rule. And we expect that to happen by the end of the year. And then implementation will start as early as 2024, if not sooner. But we're going to talk a little bit more about what that interim rule means after we do get through these slides real quick. So I mentioned CUI and FCI. Well, FCI is basically anything that has information regarding the federal contract that you as a contractor or you as a subcontractor have signed. So as you can see here, there's a lot of different pieces of it, but even you can see emails exchanged with a defense contractor or DoD is considered to be FCI. That is, it needs to be protected, not to the level of classified information, but with some protection to make sure that it can't be just revealed publicly. CUI, as I said, is a little bit more important information. It gives away information about potentially things that we don't want foreign governments to know about. So these are some examples of what that looks like. But in this case, you have to protect it at a higher level. And so there are essentially 3 levels of CMMC. Level 1 requires a self-assessment. It impacts about 150 to 180,000 of the 300,000 defense industrial base. That's what DIB stands for, contractors out there. So this is everybody from people that provide maintenance to vehicles or do provide cleaning services in military facilities or government offices. To folks that, like I said, are architects or manufacturers. So all those are the kinds of contractors we're talking about. About, like I said, 150 to 180,000 are will be considered to be level 1. And then level 2, about 100,000 contractors. In this case, and we'll talk about the NIST 800-171 framework in a moment, this will require all 110 controls to be implemented, whereas in level 1, there's a subset of 17 of the most important controls that need to be implemented. Level 2 will also require a third-party assessment. That is, you will get ready for the assessment. You will attest that you're ready for the assessment, and then a third-party provider, somebody called the C3PAO, not C3PO. It's not R2D2. These are not droids, but this C3PAO will come in, do the assessment, and certify that you are in fact in compliance. And then level 3, we aren't really going to concern ourselves about. These are very highly controlled environments with actual classified information, and that's the government will take care of assessing those folks. I don't think there's anybody on this webinar that falls in this category, so we're just going to skip it for this purposes of today. So this is the NIST 800-171 cybersecurity framework and the practices involved. As you can see, there's 110 controls around different practice areas. So there's 14 control families. Some of them have more controls than others, as you would imagine. So access control has far more controls in place than, let's say, personnel security, for obvious reasons. Accessing information, having access to resources requires a lot more controls because there's a lot of ways people can gain access. So there's a lot more things defined within it. So if you are a level 2 CMMC certified organization, then you will need to implement and adhere to all 110 individual controls, whereas level 1, it's a subset, 17 of these. So level 1 is a self-assessment. So this applies to virtually every DoD contractor and subcontractor. The only exceptions will be people that sell things to the government. So for example, if you're a government contractor and you're selling pipes and water tanks, you're not going to require a level 1 assessment because there's really nothing there that's to be protected, purchase orders at best. However, if you are a cleaning contractor and you're working at a military facility after hours or on weekends to clean up, then you're going to need a level 1 self-assessment at a very minimum because you will be exposed to information that might be considered protected. This is an annual requirement, so you have to do the self-assessment on an annual basis. You attest to this at the highest level of the organization. So this is not something that, let's say, your IT director in your company will do, or your office manager. This is something that needs to be signed by somebody on the board. So the CEO, the president, one of the officers of the organization. You still will be subject to random third-party audits and verification. So lying is not going to be tolerated. And if you are caught lying or falsely claiming that you have implemented the compliance protocols but yet have not, then you can be subject to fines and damages and being banned from any further government contracts in the future. Level 2, as I said, this is going to be an independent certification. I say Cyber AB or government, but it's been decided that it's just going to be the Cyber AB, and we'll talk more about that organization a little later. This is done every 3 years because it's a much more thorough, much more expensive process. So the government feels that you don't need to do it every year, but you are subject to annual audits if they choose to go in there. And again, there are fines and penalties if you make false claims. One of the things that I want to point out, I mentioned 800-171, and this is not a new requirement. In fact, there have been requirements in place for the last 3 years, since going back to November of 2020, that certain government contracts require self-assessment of and compliance of NIST 800-171. And many organizations that have, what we've learned, unfortunately, that have signed on the bottom line, so to speak, that they are in fact in compliance, have not been in compliance in our experience. And that presents some issues that CMMC was really designed to alleviate, because the DoD, basically figured out that a lot of contractors were just paying lip service to protecting information or thinking that they weren't really subject to it when in fact they were. So even though these NIST 800-171 self-assessments are already currently required, many organizations do not do them. In addition to the assessments, there's a couple of other really important things that you need to have. One of them is a system security plan. And Neil, can you talk a little bit more about what an SSP is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the system security plan is essentially a holistic documentation of everything that your organization uses on its network, as well as anything that you access in a public or private cloud system, or any external service providers that you might have. So it goes through each of the controls and requirements of NIST 800-171, and then how you are, what technologies you're using, or what securities you have in place that meets the requirements for each of those controls.
Excellent. That's exactly right. Nothing to add. How about a POAM? Tell us what a plan of action and milestones is.
The plan of action and milestones. So this is kind of like the initial on your way to having a full SSP. So once you go in, so let's say you're a DoD contractor and you do your first initial risk assessment. The fact that risk assessment will generate for you your POAM. It'll say where you are today. It'll show you what the gaps you have in your cybersecurity posture and what you need to get up to meeting the minimum requirements for each of the controls of NIST 800-171. So it's almost self-explanatory, the plan of action and milestones. So here's where you are now, here's what you need to do, and then here's where you'll end up once you implement these controls.
Yeah, and one of the key components is that you really, some people think of a POAM as, once I get the POAM, then I documented all my deficiencies, and then I can just move on. Well, no, you have to get those deficiencies addressed. Yep. And you have about 6 months, no more than, to get those things addressed. So it's an important document, but it's also a document that's meant to be actionable and not just something that you tuck away in a filing cabinet someplace and bring out every now and then.
Exactly.
So the ecosystem, real quickly before we get to our updates, an OSC is the organization seeking certification. So this is a government contractor or subcontractor. And they go into something called the Cyber AB marketplace. And this is an organization, Cyber AB, that was created by the government. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then they look for organizations that provide services to prepare for an assessment, RPOs, and that's what we are, a registered provider organization. Or when they're ready for their assessment, they go in and look for C3PAO, which is a third-party assessment organization that I talked about. So the Cyber AB, as I mentioned, it's an organization that was created in partnership with the DoD, but is not funded or owned by the DoD. It's its own nonprofit, independent agency. But this is where organizations that are looking for more information about certification or assessments can go and get information, or look for people like us to help them get those certifications. And RPO and RPs are critical to the organization. That's what we are an RPO, and we have 3 RPs. Will be, and these are folks that are registered practitioners that know the ins and outs of CMMC and how to help folks get ready for assessments. We help develop gap analysis and put a plan in place to close those gaps. And then finally, you have those C3PAOs, as I mentioned, that are the folks that really do the assessments once, if you're a level 2 or level 3. So with that, let's talk a little bit about some updates. As I said, the most important thing is that the rulemaking is now at the OMB. And what that means is at some point in the near future, OMB is going to release either something called a final interim rule or a proposed interim rule. The big difference between the two is a final interim rule means that the DoD is satisfied that the rule itself is pretty much what it is. They will take comments, but chances are none of those comments will change anything. If what they release is a final interim rule, that means that the process gets expedited, and you're going to see CMMC come to life much faster. If it's a proposed interim rule, that means that public comment will be, taken into account, and potentially there'll be some more rulemaking before the final rules are released. So it might take a little longer. But regardless, the expectation is that starting next year, early in probably the first quarter of next year, you're going to see contracts be let by the Department of Defense, RFPs that will require CMMC certification in order to bid on those contracts. So, Anil, if I'm a government contractor right now, and I've pretty much been ignoring this whole thing until now, can I continue to ignore it?
Absolutely not. Now is the time to take some action and really start working towards it, especially if you are, a subcontractor. Your DoD prime is going to be, renewing contracts coming up soon, and we'll be having this verbiage in those contract renewals. So really need to start getting prepared, and at the very least go through the initial assessment and get your POAM so that you can show that you're at least starting to move in the right direction to getting to where you need to be for certification.
So you mentioned initial assessment. Is that the first step? I mean, is that what organizations need to do if they're interested in getting CMMC certified?
Yeah, the first step is to find yourself an RPO and have them schedule to do a full risk assessment based on the CMMC standards or the NIST 800-171 controls and standards as they stand today, knowing that obviously the rules could change a little bit for the CMMC once they get through their process. But doing an initial risk assessment on 800-171 is the first steps.
And what, I know this is something that a lot of people always ask is like, what does it cost? What's the cost of these things? And that's one of the reasons that the CMMC has actually been delayed for so long, is because when it was first released, the Department of Defense got a lot of pushback, especially from smaller contractors saying, hey, this is cost prohibitive. For me to be able to follow these things, and implement these programs, it's going to cost a lot of money, and it may not be, the juice may not be worth the squeeze. If my business does government work with the DoD, but it represents a really small piece of my business, I'm just not going to do that, and I'm going to not worry about having to implement all these other, very expensive controls. So we've talked to a lot of contractors about that, and they always ask, what does that risk assessment cost? So can you give us a ballpark?
Yeah. So for us, obviously it's going to depend on the RPO and how they design and build their business. But with us, we do an assessment for around $4,800, just around $5,000 for the initial risk assessment. That will be a full review of all the 800 171 controls that meet either your level 1 or level 2 requirements. And then we'll help generate the POAM, the gap analysis that you need to know where you need to go on. And then, from there, depending on where you are, there's obviously going to be, remediation that needs to be done. And that could be in the form of, smaller projects. And we can work with you one-on-one to design scopes of work and quotes for those things, as well as more ongoing, like per user training and things like that, that will be more of a monthly operational expense.
Yeah, and that's a key component of this is, this isn't like you cross the finish line and you're done,
One and done.
right? It's, yeah. This is an ongoing, evolving process because the threats, just in general, cybersecurity threats, evolve. So putting in something, a program in place and just letting it ride isn't really what this is about. So I know, for example, one of the controls in there is actively reviewing logs and system files for activity. And that's not something that you stop doing. And so you have to implement a system for doing that. And for a lot of smaller contractors, that means, looking for a third-party provider that can help them with that. They may not have an internal IT department or internal cybersecurity experts to put that together. And one of the things that I found really interesting, and some of the language that has leaked out from the OMB, is that the DoD seems to be, and this has not been official, so we'll have to see what comes out when it finally is released officially. But it seems to be that the DoD is saying that if there's a contractor and they're working with a third party to provide services that are security related services to meet compliance, then that provider themselves needs to be certified at the level equal to or higher than the contractor. So if you are a contractor that is working to get your level 1 certification and you have an outside IT service provider, that outside IT service provider needs to also be level 1. And if you're going for level 2, then you need to have somebody that's certified at level 2. So that's going to put a lot of that's going to require a lot of IT service providers to go through the same program, right? So that's going to exponentially increase the number of folks that are going to need these certifications, because now it's not just the contractors themselves, but the servicers that service the contractors. Do I read that right?
Yeah, absolutely. If we're going to be doing assessments for level 1, we have to be level 1 ourselves. If we're going to be doing assessments and, getting organizations ready for certification at level 2, we have to be level 2 ourselves. And so we have to go through the same rigorous controls and standards that our clients would.
Yeah, and it's, unfortunately, like many things in the world, cybersecurity is not cheap. And we get asked a lot, how much is this going to cost? And it's really hard to quantify. I know that for us, many of our service programs for our clients who have implemented managed security services, which is very similar to what you would implement if you were looking to be CMMC compliant. That can run anywhere from $100 to $175 per user per month, depending on the size of the organization and the CMMC level that they're trying to adhere to. But a lot of these are basic cyber hygiene practices that are universal. Things like give me some examples of some controls that are part of CMMC that are also part of just like good cyber hygiene.
Yeah, a great example is always going to be multi-factor authentication. Whenever you're accessing anything, username and password is just not enough anymore. You've got to, have an app or a 6-digit code or something like that adds that additional layer of authentication to prove that you are who you say you are. Or, if you're looking on a physical security side, making sure that you keep classified documentation or controlled unclassified information in a secured space, in a locked cabinet, in a locked room, visitor logs, camera systems, things along those lines are just good business practice and good standard hygiene that are spelled out individually in CMMC.
And one of the things that I like about CMMC is that it really addresses the fact that, countries like China and North Korea, Russia, Iran, I mean, they want to get access to information. And sometimes you think about the things that you see today, how Iran is using, microprocessors that were designed for non-military purposes, for military purposes, in their drones and in their munitions. And it really speaks to the fact that what we're trying to do is protect this information in such a way that it's not revealed, even if it's not classified, but it needs to be protected. And that's one of the basic tenets of CMMC that I really, really like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my opinion, it's been a long time coming. We really should have had this, in place a long time ago. And I'm really glad that we're finally getting there, because there's a lot of extremely sensitive information that's out there. And, the organizations that have that information really should be doing better jobs to protect it, to ensure it doesn't fall into the hands of the bad guys.
And the word on the street, based on some of the conversations that I've had with some of the folks that are involved in the CMMC ecosystem, is that other government federal agencies like DHS, NASA in particular were two that were mentioned, but even the SBA and other federal agencies that use contractors and subcontractors are looking to the DoD to maybe implement a very similar program to protect that information, because this is just across the entire federal government. This isn't just a DoD thing. There's information that could be used against us is produced by every organization and every agency in the federal government, and each one of them is concerned about making sure that the contractors, the third-party contractors that they use, are protecting that information. So you may think to yourself, well, I'm not a DoD contractor, I don't need to worry about this. But if you do any sort of federal government business, chances are that you're going to be impacted at some level in the next few years. So I would highly recommend that you start getting ready sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Yeah. You get that initial risk assessment done so you know where you stand, regardless of what framework, what security controls, what compliance that you may fall under. Just by getting ready now, you'll be ahead of the game. And when it does reach your industry, which it will, you'll be one step ahead of everyone else.
Excellent. Well, we've got to I think toward the end of our session here. I want to see if give anybody an opportunity to ask any questions before we wrap it up. And then let's talk a little bit about next month. What are we going to be talking about?
I forgot already.
DMARC.
Oh, that's right. DMARC, email security. That is absolutely right. Yes, it's something new that we're seeing a lot more coming in specifically from cyber insurance carriers. So the insurance companies that will protect you in the event of a cyber disaster or a cyber incident. So there are many ways to protect email, and obviously we'll get into this more next month. But one of the particular items they're looking for now is something called DMARC, and that is a service that's relatively new, not particularly easy to implement, but it makes sure that if you're sending an email to anyone, that it is proven on the internet that it is coming from you and not from a spammer or unsolicited service.
Yep, and we'll learn more about that and our partnership with a company that we have been working with for a while to implement DMARC for our clients next month. So tune in. Thank you all for attending today. We will reach out and email the winner of the $25 Amazon gift certificate a little later this morning. But with that, thank you for attending, and look forward to seeing you again next month. Take care.
Thanks all so much. We'll see you next month.